right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Get my notes together. So today we are hosting Professor Joerg Baumeister and Ioana Giurgiu from the SeaCities Lab at the Cities Research Institute at Griffith University in Australia, where they develop and implement water-adapted urban solutions, aka AquaCities, and floating structures, aka aquitecture. So welcome, Joerg and Ioana, and please take it away.
Hi, thanks very much for inviting us.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to share screen.
So welcome from Australia. You see in the left-hand bottom side the map of Australia, indicating with the red dot where we are currently sitting. This is called Southeast Queensland, and we are sitting at one of the 5 different campuses of Griffith University, and we are sitting at Gold Coast. I think the climate is quite comparable to California, but with the additional advantage that we don't have any water issues. Yeah, it's a little bit more humid. First of all, we would like to start to acknowledge the people who are the traditional custodians of the land and the sea. So we are adding all the time the sea, that's not the official way. And we are paying respect to the elders, past and present, and also the future, and extends that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And here, looking at the map of Griffith University and the different campuses, this is originally land of the Yugara, Jagera, Turrbal, Yugambe, and Kombumerri people. When native people, and here the Aboriginal people came to Australia around 40,000–50,000 years ago. When they were living there, they were living in a completely different environment, and they were living differently. That's what we call currently still sustainability, which is originally coming from the forestry. And for us, it's very important to define that, because there are very, very many different understandings of sustainability and ecology. So originally it came from forestry, and in the end, it's about you can take out a tree, but then you have to put a small tree back in the system. That is the original definition of sustainability. And then with Brundtland from UN, and then later with Toru Inoue from Goldman Sachs, it changed sustainability from leave enough for the future, which is completely different to the previous one, to expand green bond market. So we see here already in the different definitions of sustainability what is happening in the world, and what has happened since some 200 or 300 years ago, from when industrialization started in many countries. And this is also represented now by a just currently published article in Nature Reviews, Earth and Environment. So this is a very, very conservative journal about monitoring global carbon emissions. And the result of that is that we have just 10 years time to decrease our carbon footprint. And then we can stay with a 1.5 degree warming. If we have 30 years, and then it's 2 degrees warming, no, sorry, then it's two degrees more warming due to greenhouse gas effect. And we are assuming that it will be more than 30 years. We need more than 30 years, and so therefore it will be more than 2 degrees warming in the next I don't know, 50–60 years, plus the rest. So we have a problem here, and everybody knows that. And therefore it's wonderful to have this Earth Day activities. And we were also, of course, also subscribing, and they are all, it's a wonderful webpage also, and there are all the different actions in terms of deforestation, climate change, endangered species, plastics, and so on. The question is if that's enough. Or how do we create the right future, which would be the best future we can imagine? And that's the reason why we were starting the SeaCities Lab around 3 years ago, because what we were discovering was that main discussions are happening on the land, but the sea is not really discovered. And therefore, we are very happy for this invitation also to seasteading, because I think we have a common mindset. So we want to broaden our thinking from the land to the sea, and therefore we were establishing the SeaCities Lab. And we are trying in a scientific way to think what is happening if we are moving different elements of the built environment on the land onto the sea. So how is now architecture changing to aquatecture, then transport, how can that change, community, agriculture to aquaculture economy, into blue economy, given the fact that the physical properties on the sea are completely different than on the land. So to take advantage out of buoyancy, for example, all the different pressures in terms of energy storage or wave energy, or giving the fact that biomass is much more effectively growing in the water than on the land. This makes us very, very hopeful that we can develop things in the future which are more sustainable in the traditional sense. So we have this mission, and we have also tools. We call that the Brain Kit. And this is for us very, very important during our processes, but also to consult other groups in terms of ecological thinking, and also to see the ecology as a system, how we can come up methodologically with innovative thinking, with creative thinking. And then for us, very important, because we are a group of many, many different disciplines, including not only designers, but also all the engineers, marine engineers, material engineers, mechanical engineers, but also then lots of scientists, mainly marine scientists. And how can we work together, and how can we put our tools together on one table? Strategic thinking then to apply the different results, and then the process thinking, which is a little bit more advanced than design thinking. There's another fascinating why we love what we do in terms of thinking more about the water, or the area between the water and the land, and not just the land, because looking at the start of life, this was created in the water. So without water and without the development in the water, we wouldn't be here on our Earth. So, and it's fascinating how to see how first membranes were created in the water, and then out of that cells were developing in the aquatic environment. And then multicellular organism came up, and the hydraulic cells, so the water-filled cells, they are still in all of our bodies. Yeah, either it's an eye, so these are specialized cells, or even our reproduction is just dependent on water-filled cells. And so we can still say that each cell can be compared with the enclosed pond. That means we are still aquatic beings. And now looking back from the land to the sea, and just trying to understand how we can take these advantages of the sea, and how can we develop their new solutions for our current challenges, that's what we want to do with SeaCities. What will happen now is I will just tell you some, or explain you some projects very, very quickly. And then Ioana will take over, and she will talk about wetlands and sea oasis. And I'll start now with the first project we are doing, which is called Cities Plus 1 Meter. This is mainly about flooding and sea level rise, and perhaps you heard about the current flooding issues in Australia, and they were here in our area, with some people even dying, and whole villages were flooded, which is also connected to climate change. So what we were trying to do was we were coming up with a method how we can consult cities and villages in the future, not only in terms of protecting the built environment against the water, but to deal or to go with the water. Therefore, we were coming up with this 20 different tactics for sea level rise. And this is in the end our box of different possibilities. And then we were looking at the heat maps, so about the whole risk maps. And then we were coming up with, after the analysis, we were coming up with the concepts and different tactics. So our approach is not just to go with the one possibility design solution, but with different solutions, and to compare them, to go through a feedback round with the community, and then to come up with final scenarios, which are mixed strategies, but still different options. And this is showing now the 4 different strategies and how one side could develop. I'm just using the different strategies on the left-hand side. So either you leave it and you're just protecting it from the water, or the left bottom one is just keep everything green, and then it will be flooded. So the city is then retreating. Or you can come up with something which is more loved by the developers in terms of using the water frontage a little bit better to create better real estate and more interesting atmospheric cities. And then the 4th one is to go completely towards a floating city. So that was the first project. And the next project is the project we were showing already in the announcement. And this is the so-called CMounter, where a developer from the Middle East was coming, from the Middle East, from the Arabic Gulf. And he was asking us if we can't make a nice dive attraction. And what we were suggesting then to combine that with the floating reef. And this is still currently under discussion, and it's not just about a floating reef, it's also fish nursery, and to create a kind of artificial habitat for the whole natural environment, together with our colleagues who are marine scientists, so that we can provide the natural environment additional space. And at the same time, this new artificial but natural environment gives also then divers the opportunity to somehow interact from outside. So it looks perhaps a little bit designy. It is not at all. So we were creating the whole shape with our civil and marine engineers together in terms of the hydrodynamics, aerodynamics, and then also the lighting to get as much light for the corals, which are in the belly of this object. And also the construction is a quite ordinary skeleton. We were putting that into the different flume tanks, wind channels, and so on. We were testing that and optimizing that. And we are still hoping that we can build this CMounter. And you can see on the left-hand side interior photo, which is also then a kind of a test pool and glass bottom pool for the people there. That was the second. Now the third one is just demonstrated in one, because that's a project which is still in a process in terms of patenting. At the same time, we want to show you that there's something happening in terms of funding. So this is a part of the largest research project in Australia, which is called CRC, and the Blue Economy CRC is one of the largest out of that, and that's one of the biggest project there. In the first phase, it is about for 2 million Australian dollars for 2 years, and we are developing a concept for a new concept for aquaculture further. The quite new thing is that this is for offshore aquaculture with a very, very high wave load. So you have to construct completely different than the current aquacultures. The next and last one for me is called Sea Base. And I show you that because seasteading is so much interested in living on the sea. And looking at different design proposals, very often we have this concrete pontoons and then quite ordinary buildings on top of that. And we were developing a kind of a different approach in terms of developing a prefabricated structure, which is semi-submersible, which has buoyancy bodies integrated, and additionally also a wave damping mechanism, so that if you want, and then you can keep it really very, very horizontal without any wave movement. It is modular, it can be transported in different parts, it can be shipped, it can be even dropped by airplanes. And as I said, there's this patented wave damper mechanism and also inside. And we are very excited about that too, because this new construction gives us much more better opportunities for very, very large structures. So we can think about floating air bases, we can think about floating container ports, we can think about floating tourism casino hubs, and this can happen also outside of exclusive economic zones. And perhaps that could be also interested for some of the people from the audience from seasteading. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to introduce to you 2 other projects, which are more about ways of connecting with nature and sort of caring for Earth. And then, so the first one is my thesis topic. I'm a PhD candidate with the SeaCities group. So it looks at symbiotic urban wetland systems and how we can better integrate natural ecosystems into urban context. And then the second project was the project that I did together with Joerg. It's called the Sea Oasis, and it is a closed loop floating food system for smallholders. So I'm just going to start with the wetlands. So because they act as boundaries between terrestrial and aquatic systems, wetlands are highly diverse and play a vital role in supporting sort of ecosystem health, both locally as well as globally. So locally through services such as water filtration, and then globally because of carbon sequestration and providing habitat for migratory species, which then in turn support other ecosystems along their migration routes. So this ecosystem essentially can be viewed as a model of an interface, a highly optimized interface between land and sea. And then from an urban perspective, the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands has analyzed the wetlands, and they found that wetlands can really simultaneously connect to all of the SDGs. So if we look at how urban development is currently performing, this is quite unique. So that's something that doesn't happen in the built environment at the moment. Therefore, wetlands can also provide a model for resilience and sort of multifunctional and optimal use of resources. Unfortunately, according to WWF, about 87% of global wetlands have been lost in the past 300 years, and about 1/3 of those since 1970. So this is partly happening due to the environmental conditions. So that's kind of sea level rise, which is pushing the ecosystem inwards towards the land. And then on the other hand, we have urban growth and kind of ever expanding cities that are creating pressures from the land. Because of its high importance in terms of biodiversity, we really have a duty to kind of try and enhance this ecosystem and protect it. One way of doing this is to think about constructing new wetland areas, which can be integrated functionally to provide ecosystem services for sort of urban needs, but would also boost the biodiversity, increase carbon sequestration, and overall kind of aid to re-establish the wetland areas of the globe. So by strategically siting new constructed wetlands, either on land as part of new development or in the near shore zone as part of floating developments, these systems can help existing wetlands to expand towards the sea by controlling sediment transport flows and accretion, by preserving and adding new foraging and nesting areas for migratory species, and also through their role as nurseries for a variety of marine species, they can support local food webs. In order to achieve this in a sustainable way, these systems should be coupled with self-sustaining urban development schemes. And most importantly, they should tackle the so-called energy, water, food nexus. Wetlands can be really useful in terms of water treatment as well as food production. So to achieve this kind of self-sustaining urban units, we have to understand the relationship with climate, the relationship with the site and its topography, how that affects the natural habitat, what are the available food species that we could sort of culture on site, what are the requirements for people and cultured species as well, what's the best practice or standard and optimal configuration for water, water and energy supply and consumptions. So this is kind of a complex issue, and in order to kind of facilitate these type of proposals getting more easily implemented into the real world, my work is so far focused on creating an interactive interface that helps to manage complexity, and also it helps to evaluate how wetlands can really be used functionally, and how can we maximize what we are getting from the wetland. So the app integrates best practice standards for food, water, and energy consumption and production, and that's used as a kind of a base data. And then there are some in-tool options that are offering specific selections for how different technologies can be implemented and to optimize design parameters. So the output is a diagram which represents the whole system, so the urban in connection with the sort of natural parameters. And then each node of the system can be evaluated in terms of cost-benefit ratio and fair share ratio, which kind of talks about the balance between how much of a specific function or service is provided by nature, by natural infrastructure, by urban infrastructure, or by hybrid infrastructure. So this is a screenshot of the interface, and then on the left-hand side you have some of the controls, and on the right is the systems diagram. And it starts off with 5 main urban functions, which are on the innermost circle. It's protection, defense, community, and productivity and transmission. And then all these connect to means and strategies on the middle 2 circles for how to achieve these functions. And then finally, the outer circle represents quantities and relates to sort of real on-site parameters, such as cubic meters of treated water through wetland filtration, or hybrid mangrove food culture areas, for example. Yeah, so as an example of an output, this is the kind of diagram populated after selecting the options for the development. And then here we're looking at the coastal protection function in blue. And in this case, it's giving me a cost-benefit ratio, and I can see that this particular function is achieved through 68% natural infrastructure, so that's natural mangrove areas, and then 16% hybrid infrastructure, so that means cultured mangrove areas that are primarily used for food production, but they also have a functionality in terms of coastal protection. And then the rest of this function relies on urban infrastructure. So these parameters can really help to inform design decisions, especially in the early phases of the project. And in the example here, I'm just showing the difference between different water treatment options. So on the left, we've got solar steels, which are relatively cheap, but they take up a lot of space and they displace ecosystem around the development. In the other extreme on the right-hand side, we have small-scale desalination, which is really expensive, but has a small footprint. And then in the middle area, we've got wetland water treatment, which is essentially adding to the functions of the site. So on top of kind of treating water and creating water quality, you can also harvest food, you can support biodiversity by supporting bird species in the area, and it's essentially creating a much more sort of holistic scenario for this system that connects well to the other components. So in terms of the design options, we then kind of start with the number of people, and it's sort of calculating what's the sort of demand for water and energy based on the amount of people and the standard that's chosen for consumption and appliances and so on. And then you can select from specific technologies. So for example, different types of wetland for water treatment, and then it gives you a value, an area of how much of that specific type of wetland you would need to meet the demands, and same for the energy. And then in terms of food, at the very bottom, we can select how much of the necessary food intake. So that's based on recommended averages. In this case, it's for Australia. How much of this food intake we want to generate on site. And then in another tab, you can sort of select from a list of endemic species that can be cultured on site. So that's just to make sure that we're not sort of creating an agriculture that's not sustainable. So in this case, we had a couple of types of oysters, and then milkfish that was grown within a mangrove silvo fishery, which is a sustainable way of using the mangrove's natural processes to raise fish. And then again, it's giving the sort of crop area required to meet the demands that for the specific settings. At the moment, I'm working on a design application test for a case study site, and then I'm trying to develop a set of spatial design guidelines that would allow me to come up with a set of rules for how to really implement on a site these areas and numbers that are coming out of the tool. So some strategies, for example, are placing infrastructure such as pontoons, energy, so wind turbines, even cultured species such as the sort of oyster rope cultures. So placing them in a way that works with the hydrology and actually helps the mangrove areas to increase, and therefore increases the functions of coastal protection, gives you more culture area for endemic species such as halophytes that can be grown in a sort of mangrove adapted agriculture system, or fish, and so on. So yeah, so this is a kind of an example of working with an ecosystem and trying to maximize the ecosystem functionality while using the urban infrastructure to support ecosystem growth. So I'll now show you a different approach in the Sea Oasis project. And this was a closed loop floating farm system, which was designed for smallholders. So in this case, this is closed loop, and it was partially about sort of transferring these high efficiency industrial food production technologies into a sort of more understandable model and a kind of low cost model that can be used by simple farmers. So this project came as kind of a response to the issue of food supply and food security. And as we know, the population is expected to increase to about 9.7 billion people by 2050. And at the same time, the area of land that's available for crops remains the same. So currently about 5.1 billion hectares are allocated to food production, and that's 1.1 billion hectares for crops and the rest for livestock. So if we think about ensuring food production or supply for the future, there's a lack of about 2 billion hectares of land to meet the demands of 2050. So how we can accommodate this? If we just think of the land, the options aren't particularly appealing. So we can either replace forests with extra crop areas, which wouldn't work from a sustainability point of view. It would just inevitably lead to worsening the climate crisis through deforestation. And then another option would be highly difficult to implement because it means essentially dramatically shifting our diets to allow for less meat consumption and expand plant crop areas into zones that are currently used for livestock. So we were looking at a possible option 3, and that was to shift from agriculture to aquaculture and expand these crop areas onto the sea. And then also through targeting highly efficient marine species such as microalgae, that would then further decrease the areas necessary for meeting future demand. So considering the current aquaculture techniques and the fact that most of the systems are actually open to the environment at that scale, even though the footprint is decreased, there are still some environmental challenges in terms of mitigating the negative effects of implementing this and upscaling at such a big ratio. So on the other hand, resolving the issue of food supply is not really limited to finding additional areas, but it also revolves around creating food security globally. So for that, we've got to look at what's happening at the moment. And actually, for this reason, and because smallholders, which are located mostly in developing countries, play a key role in global food supply chains, but they're also located in areas where there's great food insecurity. So they might be producing food that helps the local market and helps even the global market, but they themselves might be struggling because of food insecurity. We decided to sort of target the project towards the smallholders in these specific areas. So in a sort of bigger picture, that would help to achieve a balance or to start taking steps towards a balance in food supply globally. Because of the environmental challenges that I mentioned with aquaculture, we were trying to find an example of a working closed loop agricultural system. And we were looking at the Oasis as an example, which is a sustainable closed loop system. It's driven by smallholders as well. And we wanted to figure out a way how we can transfer and adapt that onto the sea. So essentially, in the land-based oasis, all the ecosystem is centered around the date palm, and it's which is providing, it's filtering light, which allows other species to grow underneath in the shade. It's providing soil stabilization, and then with a little bit of human intervention, it's also helping to manage sort of water infrastructure. So this system is recycling sort of all the waste, and then it's forming at a larger scale a network which was linked originally through trade and sort of travel routes. So we wanted to transfer this onto the sea, and we looked at what is the base species that's kind of the equivalent of the date palm on sea, and we came to the conclusion that that's a microalgae. So instead of filtering sunlight, they're basically filtering water, and also stand at the base of all the other food webs that then depend on them. So in terms of stability and anchoring, in this case, the water buoyancy is providing this stability. So, and then kind of zooming out and thinking again about this network of nodes, by targeting microalgae, actually there's an opportunity to link to a kind of different trade and travel network, which is a high value market. That's the global food market, existing food market. So the system that we came up with is quite a simple setup. It's formed of so one sea oasis is formed out of 5 to 7 aquapods, as we call them, which are these circular units. So each unit is formed of a base system, which is a basic floating system that uses tractor tires for the floating, and then a network of ropes and buoys that act as a support structure, and a type of submerged photobioreactor for growing the algae. And then the rope system can be quite flexible, so it can be arranged in different configurations, and each configuration works better depending on how the units are used. So how it works is it's essentially the input is seawater. You can add a desalination unit and sort of recycle the brine reject, or even use freshwater species. So we have a fish algae unit on the right top hand side, and then from that unit, the wastewater from the fish is fed into the filter unit where we're growing oysters and seaweeds. They clean the water. The oyster becomes a marketable product. Seaweed is then fed back into the fish algae unit, where it can be used as feed. And then the clean water is then fed into the mixing unit, which is essentially a kind of composting unit for either plant waste or manure or liquid waste. So this is essentially a unit where you're generating fertilizer, and then the result of that is fed back into a hydroponic unit, where you can grow plants. So in this seawater scenario, that would be using halophytic plants, and if using fresh water, then you need a desalination unit to support this. So that's the hydroponic unit. It's basically using the rope and buoy system, and it's using a plant-based floating mat to support the plants. And then this is the filter unit. At the base of this unit is transparent. So it's letting sunlight pass through in terms of minimizing the impact of the pods on the environment. And then we have a system that sort of pumps water or cool water from the lower surfaces of the sea to regulate temperature. And we're also thinking of using these shade balls to also regulate the light levels for growing the algae in the fish algae units. So we did a kind of initial cost analysis and came up with a couple of configurations that work together in terms of the couples of species and the configuration that you achieve. And then we try to look at it in terms of what's the return time, what kind of risk levels are associated. So for example, you could have a really high market amphibious species that's super sensitive to environmental conditions, so that creates a higher risk. So looking at that, we then try to identify what would be the impact of this system. So we looked comparatively at the average farm size, household size, and yearly income that's currently happening in Latin America, Caribbean, Africa, and Asia. And as you can see, the SeaOasis, all of the configurations are far smaller, so more easy to manage for a 5-person family. And the income would potentially be for the smallest income, it would be almost double the largest current income for smallholders. So in order to implement this, we try to find sort of different solutions and where would be the best zones to implement this. So we looked at environmental conditions and we came up with this map, which is looking where you have the best sea surface temperature. So the best conditions would be constant year round, and the best light conditions, so getting enough sun to optimally grow the algae. And then that sort of correlates actually with the locations of the smallholder farms. And we've then proposed different locations for the various types of configurations. So based on risk, based on hunger levels or sort of food insecurity levels, based on proximity to existing reverse osmosis plants, so that you can reuse actually the brine from the plants. And then currently with this project, we have a publication coming up. So in a couple, probably in a couple of months, it will become a book for SeaOasis, and we are looking at sort of opportunities and trying to find funding and collaboration so that we can start to sort of make a prototype with this project. So yeah, thank you very much. That was it from me.
Thank you so much. And so now we can open up for questions from the audience. So you are free to unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can put your question in the chat and I'll ask it for you. But I think that was a lot of information for us to think about and learn from. So thank you so much, Ioana and Joerg.
You're welcome. Sorry, yeah, perhaps it was a little bit too much information, yeah, but I think it's more to get an impression how we as researchers also can participate in the challenges, not only by analyzing what is currently happening, but really to come up with solutions and to look for people who are happy to apply the solutions now together.
Yes, well, it strikes me, you know, I'm used to talking to people who are of the mindset of build something and see how it works. But I like this idea of, oh, we can actually predict and maybe save costs and save effort and save time if we have a model to sort of predict what we need to create in order to get the outputs we want. It's a refreshing approach from where I'm sitting.
Yeah, in the end, the ideal is both together, yeah, to try things, to analyze things, to think about things, and really to sometimes, and therefore we are now very keen to build it, yeah, to try it, because now we have to become makers, and we have to collect our experience also.
Jane, do you have a question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm wondering about whether, I'm sorry, I came in late. I got stuck in the library, regretfully. And I'm wondering about whether you've looked at the Biomimicry Global Design Challenge as a source of funding and a way to develop prototypes. I've been a judge in that competition for the last 10 years. And there's hardly ever an Australian entry in it. And I saw something somewhat similar to this last year, but with not nearly as much insight and knowledge gone into it.
So may I ask, how is it called? It's biomimicry, and then?
Global design, design challenge.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I can put a link to it. Will the presentation be available? Is it being recorded? Or? Right.
So a question from Oz in the chat. You mentioned brine reject. Can you offer a remedy to manage desalination effluents?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that we discovered in our research with the sea oasis, was that actually there are a lot of halophytic plants that can be used as feed for animals, and that can actually be watered using brine reject. So because at the moment there's a really big problem, because all these desalination factories are dumping the brine reject back into the sea, which is then we're starting to see in some areas growth in salinity because of these human activities. So that there are initiatives trying to look into how to kind of resolve that. So for us, it was more saying, okay, we locate the sea oases in proximity to these desalination plants, to the existing ones, and then you can have the community pick up the brine reject and reuse it to grow the halophytic cultures.
We are also part of one research project, which is researching the question how we can transfer the brine directly into fertilizers.
So I had a question about your platform, the one that could potentially hold like very heavy objects and buildings like a casino, and you said part of it was a wave dampener, or I forget the term you used. So can you tell us more about that and how it works? So
in the end, these are two different things. Yeah, the one is the platform, and that's it's like a kind of a three-dimensional construction, which is used already on the land, for large stadiums or whatever. It would have to be adapted to the use on the sea, and the material would be also different. But in the end, the idea is the same. Instead of building now on the sea just large structures, either out of concrete or with hulls and other big construction, would be a modular construction, and each part would be not more than the length of one container. So in the end, you can come with the container and then you can build it on site, or you can already prefab parts and then you can dismantle that then together there. That's the one part which is something we were already simulating with the German university together, University of Rostock, with a feasibility study, and so we are very, very sure that this will work. The other one is the wave damper, and this is a kind of a this is something we have to try now, yeah. So we were calculating, and we were taking, for example, a platform of 70 by 35 meters, and there would be the power of 1 Tesla would be enough to keep the platform in a horizontal stage up to, I don't know, 3 or 4 meter waves. Yeah, so, and that's just in special situations. In other situations, if we take this structure with this prefab structure, it's in terms of wave load, it deals much more better than a massive volume like a pontoon or a hull or whatever. But this is ready also to try. Yeah, so we are what we are calling the Death Valley. So we have some projects which are now at the edge, and we have to build now prototypes, and that's one of the prototypes we would have to build. So if somebody is coming up with another funding opportunity, that would make us much more happy. And thanks, Jane, again, yeah, for the one tip.
Okay, so I have a question, 2 questions from David. Now, so he says he's very concerned about the accidental introduction of invasive species in sea farming. So what can be done to mitigate this other than forcing sea farmers to source locally?
Okay, so we can discuss that topic on 2 different levels. The one level is on the sea oasis level. The other one is on what we are calling the sea fisher level, which is about a structure which is massive. Yeah, it's offshore, 200 meters by 40 meters. And I think the question is more directed towards this. And I'm completely with these concerns. And that's the reason why we are part of this project, yeah, because some people, and also I think it's also you can say in some areas of the world, people are not as much concerned about environmental influences, and it's not just about it's about now all the fish and the environmental waste of fish. It's also about how they are creating the fish food and so on. So if you're just going deeper into the whole now large scale fish farming business, it's quite dramatic sometimes. At the other hand, there are solutions. Yeah. So the question is, for example, how much are we dealing with enclosed tanks? And I had just yesterday evening a very long discussion with colleagues from Norway, and they have already, so they were building now, for example, a donut, which is completely enclosed, so it's still somewhere in the natural environment floating, but it can be elevated, it can be submerged, and everything which is going in and out is somehow filtered, so it should be somehow neutral. At the other hand, you can say, now looking at the experience of a fish, yeah, I wouldn't like to be a salmon or a tuna in this kind of completely artificial environments. Yeah, so there are lots of challenges, but I think that's representing our current challenges in the world.
His second question is, as to the floating structures, what do you think about hurricanes and typhoons? I know even aircraft carriers have a lot of difficulty with pretty harsh weather.
So we were, sorry, there's a sea oasis. I know that the maps, they're quite complex, but they're excluding zones of typhoons, hurricanes, and so on. Yeah, so we are just getting away from there. In terms of the sea base, for example, I have to say that as soon as you have a critical size, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. And I've been in a hurricane, yeah. So I've experienced 250 kilometers wind speed and very, very high waves on the sea. And I'm full respect, yeah. But if there's a structure which is 1 kilometer or even longer and 20 meters high, and then this is not really challenging for the structure.
So I kind of would like to go back to the introduction of invasive species. So one thing we've talked about in the Seasteading Institute is that on parts of the high seas in the ocean, there's not a lot of life. It's just the open water doesn't cultivate life because nutrients sink too far from the surface that they don't photosynthesize. So, so I'm wondering, what is the real, if you're out on the high seas in these sort of desert areas, desert ocean, what are some of the risks to introducing fish or creating a seaweed farm in that part of the ocean? How do you define invasive species there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what type of system. So basically for the sea oasis, the whole idea was to actually keep it closed loop exactly because of that. So then it's sort of, yes, there is some overlap with potentially birds, but it's essentially a closed loop system. So you're not really diversing any sort of algae in the water in the sea. The fish is sort of completely enclosed. The algae, it's actually because we took photobioreactors from these highly efficient industrial models. The most efficient ones, so you have like raceway ponds and so on, the open ones are not very effective. So it's an enclosed, it's kind of like a suspended floating bag with algae. So everything is enclosed in the COAC system. So it's not really that was one of the things that we were considering there, where you can sort of grow any species, but then it needs to be fully enclosed. Whereas in the other one, so in the wetland, for example, that's all about actually not doing that and not bringing any new species and really working with whatever is there and finding, looking at indigenous knowledge, for example, for how you can actually bring back, you can eat mangrove fruits and sort of all these things that we sort of lost or don't know about in the city. I hope that answers the question. We can also argue on the other side. So I'm completely against environmental engineering, but just observing what is happening, for example, in West Australia, where they're putting fish attracting devices, they call it FATs, into the open sea, because everybody knows that, So as soon as you are putting something floating in the sea, and then there's a whole ecosystem happening around, So we can also argue that if we are putting, and that's not very, very large size now, but if we are putting structures, floating elements into the sea, it can even very, very attractive for the environment to build up something which is not a reef, but something which is a whole new ecosystem there.
Yes, and we've been sort of in favor of that kind of development and have looked at ways to create those ecology systems so that you're capturing carbon or deacidifying the water, right? So with the effort to sort of restore the environment in the ocean. So, but I think it is always important to know and try to avoid those unintended consequences, right? So it's good to have all perspectives on that. Well, we've reached the end of the hour and I don't see a lot of questions coming in. So would you share, is there a way that people can reach out to you if they have questions later on?
Yes, through our website, really. So there's on our website, there's a contact form.
Great. And so just everyone, usually I will send out an email with the chat, if anyone has shared links in the chat, which I saw a few. Oz, thank you for sharing. So if you RSVP'd on Eventbrite, you will receive an email with a recap of the event and then the video link and the chat. And so if you did not register on Eventbrite, if you came through Meetup, please share your email address with me. And then our next social is May 20th. That's a Friday. And it's a coffee talk. So it's an open discussion for anything related to seasteading. And so I hope you'll join and you can come bring your questions, your ideas, project ideas. But thank you so much, SeaCities, for joining us. And thank you everyone for joining the call.
Yeah, good afternoon down under. I think it was a great presentation. You just had a lot of stuff in there and I think everybody's brain is chock-a-block full.
Yep. We got to watch the video and come back with our notes.
Yes, that's cool. Yeah. And there was one question from Steve about publications. So CMounter has published, COACIS is currently becoming a Springer book, and then Cities Plus One is also becoming a Springer book. So there are most of the projects they are published, yes, or will be published very soon.
That was really great. Really great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.